everybody. So I hope you're having a great week so far. You know, it's only Tuesday, at least when I'm filming this it is. But I hope you're having a great start to your week. And is anyone else frozen? I live where it's really cold, at least right now. We have like back and forth days because like last week we had like a day where it was 60 and then today it's like 32. So I've got my hot cocoa. I just want to talk today about my birth story, and a lot of people have asked me about my birth story. As many of you know, my son Oliver was born in October, and he will be in some of my videos in the future, but right now he's hanging out with his dad so I can film, and until I get the hang of things that might just be easier for now. So he's playing video games with his dad. But a lot of people have asked me my birth story, and I actually have a blog called kissesandkevlar.blog, and I've had that for almost a year. So if you want to know a little bit more about me, that's a good place to start. Otherwise, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, all with the same name, Kisses and Kevlar. But I did a full blog post on that, so if you would rather read it than watch it, you can go ahead and check that out. Otherwise, that's what I'm going to talk about today. Everyone's birth story is different. So each woman is different, and each pregnancy is different, and each baby is different. And Oliver is my first child, and I honestly had really high expectations of what my birth story would be like, and people kept telling me, you know, don't get set on your birth plan, because that's not always what's going to happen, and you don't want to be heartbroken when it doesn't happen the way that you want it to. But at the same time, I agree with that now, but at the time, it was really important to me to have a plan in place. And so for me, my birth plan all along, I really wanted to have a vaginal birth. I was not all natural. I definitely wanted an epidural, but I definitely wanted a vaginal birth. I have two sisters who've had children that have had to have C-sections, and C-sections are just, the recovery is really hard. I mean, you're having major surgery, and then you're having a newborn that's completely dependent on you when you are sore and you're exhausted and you can't hardly move and you can't cough and things like that. So I was really adamant that I really wanted a vaginal birth, and so that was my plan through my whole pregnancy. And unfortunately, that's not exactly the way that it went. But like I said, oftentimes that happens. You know, you can't predict everything and you can't plan for everything. So my due date was October 18th, and on the week of that week, I was supposed to be due on a Thursday, and on Monday, October 15th, I woke up and I really wasn't feeling very well. And I had been fighting high blood pressure for about the last week, but I was 39 weeks pregnant, and that wasn't really unusual or unexpected. And I had some major swelling in my legs, so I was just, you know, concentrating on keeping my feet up and trying to rest and relax, which was very difficult since we just bought a house 3 days before and had moved. But I was just doing my best to stay calm and not worry about it. And my doctor didn't really feel, at the time of my last appointment, she did not feel that it was an issue as long as I just continued to rest, and it really wasn't that high at that time, and just high enough that they wanted to monitor it. So on that Monday when I woke up, I really just did not feel good, and I called my mom, and she said, you should probably check your blood pressure. So I did, and it was, I have it written down here just so I wouldn't forget, it's 189/99, which I knew was really, really bad. So I called my mom back, and she said, you need to call your doctor immediately and go from there. So unfortunately, the week of my due date, my doctor, who had been my doctor from before my pregnancy and throughout my pregnancy, was on vacation. And I knew that. And I was really hoping, she had thought that Oliver would be late just because it was my first pregnancy, and he just was happy to be in there. He was not wanting to come out. And so I was kind of hoping that he would wait until she got back from vacation to come, or come the week before she went on vacation, but unfortunately that's not what happened. But I called the doctor's office, and the doctor that was there at the time said come in. They really didn't like that number. So we had already packed our bags. Our bags had been packed for several weeks because I just really wanted to be prepared in case I went into early labor or anything happened. And where we were moving at the time, I just wanted not to stress about that. So those bags were actually already packed and were in the car. So we were ready to go, and it was about 3 p.m. when the doctor saw me. It was kind of late in the day. But the nurse called me back to do my vitals, and it had dropped. My blood pressure had dropped from that morning, but it was still 160/89. And so they really just were not comfortable with that number. And I didn't even go into a clinic room. The nurse told the doctor, he was standing right there. She told him what my blood pressure was, and he said send her straight up to OB. So I got there, and they said that they were admitting me for observation. But I knew, just being, 3 days from my due date, that I was more than likely going to be staying. And especially with the blood pressure that high, that can become really dangerous for you and the baby really quickly. So we were admitted, and then by that evening, my blood pressure was still elevated, and the doctor came in and said, we're going to keep you, and we don't have to induce you, but if your blood pressure stays elevated, we're going to want to induce you because it's just too dangerous. There's too many factors that we can't control. So again, this wasn't something that I wanted to do. I wanted to keep him as long as I could inside, and as long as he wanted to be in there, as long as he was safe, I wanted to do that. But since there was more risk involved, I decided that, it was best that we stay. So he started me on Cytotec, which is a drug that helps thin the lining of your cervix, which might be too much information for some of you, but that's what it does. And it's a more natural approach to induction. So it sometimes, in a lot of women, once the cervix is thinned, then it will jumpstart labor. So that was the hope, was that they would start me on Cytotec and I would start laboring on my own. So they gave me that medication. It was late in the evening, I think it was 9 o'clock or so. And I started having contractions, but they were not consistent. They weren't very hard. They weren't bothering me. So by about midnight, because once they give you that medication, you have to stay really still because they actually insert it. So I had to stay really still. So about midnight, they finally said I could get some rest, and they said we'll be back in at 6 a.m. if you're not in labor to get you up for a shower and get you some food before we start this process. So at 6 a.m., mind you, there was almost no sleep that night because I knew my baby was going to be coming, and hospitals are just very noisy. They're not very restful anyway. And so by 6 a.m. they came in, and she's like, okay, let's get you up for a shower. When I stood up, it was just like this rush of fluid, and I honestly thought that my water had broken, but it actually hadn't. It was just all of the fluid and everything from the thinning of my cervix. So the doctor came right in, and he said, your water hasn't broken, but you're at a good place to start, so I'm going to break it for you. And so they put me back in bed. I didn't have a shower. I didn't eat. Nothing. And I was like, okay. So they put me back in bed, and he broke my water, and I started contracting immediately. And my contractions from the get-go were 2 to 3 minutes apart, and just stayed that way consistently throughout the entire time that I labored. So from 6 a.m. By about, I think it was 11:30 or noon, honestly couldn't tell you the time, it just warps when you're in that place because you're in a lot of pain and you're contracting. I was contracting so consistently, and I wasn't I wasn't having large breaks between my contractions, so time just kind of ran together. And but around that time, I finally said, okay, I've got to have an epidural. My body was already so exhausted, and my plan had been to make it to 6 centimeters dilated before I got the epidural. But unfortunately, at that time, I was only dilated to a 4. So the anesthesiologist came in, and they inserted the epidural into my spine. And I did not know. I refused to watch videos about epidurals because I know that they can be really terrifying. So I was not going to watch it. And they make you scoot to the edge of the bed, and then you have to hold completely still while they insert this needle into your spine. And the problem was that I was contracting the whole time. So they're like, hold still, do not move, and I'm in full-blown contractions. Like, that was one of the harder parts, because I'm just trying to remain really still, because I know if they don't do it properly, it can really affect everything. Thankfully, we didn't have any problems. My husband was right in front of me, and I had a nurse there as well, and it was over. And honestly, I didn't feel any pain from the epidural, probably because I was contracting. So the epidural actually itself did not bother me. I know some women say it's extremely painful. I didn't have that problem. So by about 6 o'clock, I was still having full-blown contractions, full-blown labor, but I wasn't feeling them. I mean, the epidural, completely blocks that stuff as long as it's done properly. And the epidural was great while it worked. So by about 6 o'clock, I was still only dilated to a 6. And I was like so tired. And I was just like, this child's never coming. I've been in labor for 12 hours. Nothing is happening. Nothing is progressing. So by about 8, I had moved up a little bit more. And then I think it was around 11 o'clock that I felt the urge to push. And it might have been more like 11:30. It was after 11, but I mean, when they tell you that your body, you will know when you need to push, there's no denying it. You have this primal urge to push. You cannot resist it. There's no stopping it. If you have to push, you have to push. That's just it. And unfortunately, by this time, my epidural was completely gone. I was in full-blown, natural, screaming, pushing labor. And so I pushed for 2 hours, which is an eternity. When you are laboring, that feels like forever. And the one thing that I would have wanted to change about the delivery room was the freaking clock on the wall opposite my bed, because I would think that like an hour had passed and it would be 5 minutes. And my contractions by this point were about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes apart, so they had dropped even more. And I'm just pushing and pushing. And it was a little after 1 o'clock and 1 a.m. the next day, and I was so exhausted, and I was crying, and I had my husband on one side and my doula on the other. And I said, is anything happening? Are we making any progress? Is he coming out? And she said, the nurse, she said, well, you're further along than you were before. I thought my husband was going to kill her. And I started to feel panicked, because I was like, why isn't my child coming? Why isn't my son coming? What's wrong? Like, is he stuck? Like, what's going on? So come to find out, later on, they did not tell me this at the time, he was actually stuck in the birth canal, and his head, measured at 14 inches, was much too large to come out on his own. But he kept trying, and he was terrifying looking when he was born because of the shape of his head. But he was trying to come, but it just wasn't working. And at that time, I looked at my doula and I said, what are my options? And of course, between contractions and screaming and sweating and just all the beauty of birth. And so the nurse told me, we can bring in the doctor and let you know your options. So the on-call doctor was there at the time. She came in and she said, you have 2 options. She said, we can attempt a vacuum. However, he's too far up, and I think that it would cause more complications if you tried that option. And so the second option is a C-section. And so we can do that, and we can just prep you and get you right in, and he'll be born. And so at that point, I was more than ready. I just was so exhausted, my body, I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was really sad, but also relieved. Like, my body was just relieved that I had another option, that the end was in sight. And so they prepped me for surgery, got me back there, and the anesthesiologist came in and had administered who knows what. I mean, they tell you, but I have no recollection of that at all. And she administered these drugs, and she looked at me and she said, "Can you feel your legs?" And I said, "Yeah, I can feel my legs." And she said, "Can you wiggle your toes?" And I said, "Yeah." And I showed her. And between her asking that question and the doctor coming back in, there was some type of miscommunication. And the doctor began operating on me before I was numb. So she started cutting into my abdomen before I could feel it. I could feel everything. So I immediately began to let her know that I could feel that. And she said, "You can feel this?" And I screamed, and my husband's like, "Yes, she can feel that. Like, you have to stop." And so immediately she said, "Okay, we have to put her out. She can't be conscious." And so, I mean, it was just like this flurry of activity, and my husband kissed me and he was pulled out of the room. Like, I mean, it was instantaneous. And before I knew it, I was out. And honestly, I'm really glad that I had labored for so long up to that point, because I was kind of out of it. And if I would have known what was going on, I probably would have been a lot more scared. Because I would have been like, why do I have to be put out for this? What's wrong? Like, anyway, so about an hour and a half later, Oliver was born at 3:27 a.m. And unfortunately, I did not get to meet him when he was born because I was unconscious. So they immediately took him into the nursery and did all their, everything with him. And my husband was able to be present for that. And I woke up about an hour later, 4:30, in recovery. And I immediately asked for the baby, asked if he was okay, and asked for my husband. And nobody can express to you the love you will feel when you hold your child. And I thought that I would understand, or I kind of had an idea, but you really don't. And until you hold your baby in your arms, there's literally nothing that compares to it. And so I got to meet my son, and my husband was there with me. My doula was in the room at that time. She was not able to be present for the C-section. She was not allowed to be in the room. And she wasn't allowed to be in there even when we were just having a regular C-section, let alone an emergency. And so we just had this like really beautiful few moments together, and literally the most amazing experience of my life, those few minutes. And when they say that you forget your labor and your childbirth and all of that stuff, you do. You forget the pain, you forget the fear, you forget everything that comes with that when you hold your baby. And he was born at 7 pounds and 10 ounces. He was measured at 22 inches long, and his head was 14 inches around. And he was a beautiful, beautiful baby, and just very alert from the get-go, very calm. And so we were just thrilled, absolutely ecstatic to have him with us. And even though my birth story is not what I wanted it to be, and there was some traumatic times, and the thing that I've struggled with the most is not being conscious when he was born. So I didn't get to see him in those first few moments. I didn't get to do skin to skin with him until much later. All of those things. And the thing that has bothered me the most is not seeing my husband meet my son. And that makes me really emotional, because I really wanted to be awake for that, and I wasn't able to be. And so that's the thing that I have struggled with the most. But all that matters is that he arrived safely, and that he was healthy, and that he's thriving, and all of those beautiful things. And so that's my birth story. It wasn't planned that way, but it happened the way that it was meant to happen. And I may do a video just completely dedicated to post-delivery and my postpartum journey, if you guys would like to see that. I also plan to do a video on breastfeeding that will be coming soon. All the things that no one tells you about breastfeeding. So some of you may find that relevant, some of you may not, and that's okay. But I'm just so thankful that my baby arrived healthy and happy, and that he's safe, and that he's here with me and my husband, and that we've been able to just create this little world for him that is safe and happy. So watch out for my future videos and check out my social medias and my blog if you'd like. I'd love to hear from you guys. Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think. Let me know your birth story. I would love to hear your experience and what happened with you and your babies. How many kids do you have? All those kinds of things. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.